Hey folks, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. We've got great news. Brand new format. All English, all the time. Getting rid of the translators, they're hard to listen to. Getting rid of the House Speaker, he's hard to listen to. We want to hear the politicians, right? And that's what we'll be doing. A little bit of extra information about each MP, a little bit of humor, more information in a shorter period of time, making Canadian politics fun again. I think that you'll enjoy it. It flows very smoothly. Check it out. Here's an episode. Hey there, what's up? Ehren, Question Period Canada. How are you today? Yesterday was such a wild day on Parliament Hill. I've never seen PIERREPOILIEVRE ask so many questions during Question Period, and he really had Trudeau on the ropes. Trudeau was freaking out, on his back heel, trying to fight Poilievre. I kind of think he lost. Not sure if he'll be there today. It was a busy one for him. Anyway, we're going to swing into the show. New format. It's great. We'll get through this pretty quick. You'll have all the information and a little bit of fun along the way. Let's get into it.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
La communauté juive est si...
The Jewish community is being targeted in Montreal.
Alone. This is what's happened. A Montreal synagogue has been firebombed. A hate preacher has called for the extermination of Jews. Jewish students have been called the K word. Terrorists fired bullets at 2 different schools. And the UK Foreign Office has warned of likely terrorist attacks in Canada. We've all seen the Prime Minister's theatrical words, but what concrete steps has he taken this week to protect Jews and all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for that really important question. We condemn unequivocally the attempted firebombing, the shooting at 2 Jewish schools overnight last night in Montreal. There is no room and there is no place for anti-Semitism in Canada. There is no room, there is no place for hate. There is no room and there is no place for violence. Mr. Speaker, we condemn this unequivocally. We stand with Jewish Canadians across the country. The SPVM in Montreal is investigating, and we will continue to monitor this situation, call for calm, and ensure that Canadians are safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So it was fun to see Poilievre kick it off in English. Doesn't usually happen that way. His first line was French, the rest was English. But you unfortunately just met Karina Gould. She's an MP from Burlington, Ontario. She's also leader of the Government of Canada. And she's just as that, very pregnant, but lame at the same time. A boring clown. Fortunately, we have another kind of clown up next. A little wild clown. Francois-Philippe Champagne gets grilled by Poilievre. Let's check.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And the Prime Minister have known for 6 months of the scandal brewing at their Green Slush Fund, a $1 billion fund that one of its own public servants compared to the sponsorship scandal and said there was money for nothing. Yesterday, Canadians learned that the chair of this fund directed $200,000 tax dollars to her own company. What? That minister has known that for 6 months. Why has this Liberal chair not been fired from this job?
L'honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question, but Mr. Speaker, let me bring a bit of facts into the fairy tale of the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, from the moment that I learned that there was any allegations of wrongdoing, I demanded that there was a third-party investigation, Mr. Speaker. Upon receiving the report, Mr. Speaker, we demanded that there be corrective action at the management level and at the board level. Mr. Speaker, we expect the highest level of governance from any entity that receive money from the Government of Canada.
They're all clowns, guys. That Francois-Philippe Champagne, he's definitely a clown. But he's got energy, he fights back. I think he'd be an interesting leader of the opposition just because he brings a lot of energy. Doesn't have great endurance, though. Up next, Poilievre again goes at Stephen Guilbeault. He's
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 8 years, not only is the Prime Minister not worth the cost, he still does not have a climate plan. He said that if Canadians paid his carbon tax, it would save the world, but here are the facts. Canada now ranks 58th out of 63 in climate action. Canada is the only G7 country not to have reduced its emissions below 1990 levels. The Prime Minister has missed 7 of 8 of his targets over the last decade. And finally, according to a bombshell report by his own Environment Commissioner this week, he will not hit his 2030 Paris Accord targets. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister just admit he doesn't have a climate plan, he has a tax plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying in this House is factually incorrect. Facts. We have the best performance in terms of greenhouse gas reduction since 2019, Mr. Speaker. Fact. We have a plan that has been applauded by environmental organization, research organization, municipalities, even oil companies have applauded our climate plan, Mr. Speaker. And this morning in the Environmental Committee, the Commissioner to the Environment and Sustainable Development said that not only pollution pricing is working, but it is responsible for 30% of emission reduced in Canada since 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's funny that he keeps focusing on 2019 and the year that followed, because that year was the only year in which emissions went down because the economy was locked down, Mr. Speaker. In every other of the 8 years this Prime Minister has been in power, he has missed his emissions targets. He now ranks 58th out of 63 nations. He leads the only country in the G7 that has not reduced its emissions below 1990 levels. And his own Environment Commissioner says he will not hit his Paris targets. So, will they finally admit that after 8 years, this carbon tax is all pain and no gain?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying is still factually incorrect, because we haven't missed any of our targets. The only target we have is for 2030. Canada has missed many targets because for 10 years, the Conservative Party did nothing to fight climate change. They did nothing to support clean energy. They did nothing to support electrification of transportation. They did nothing on adaptation, Mr. Speaker. That's why Canada has been missing our targets. This government, this Prime Minister, we will meet our targets. We're 85% to our 20 targets already, Mr. Speaker.
A red leather tie is a funny choice. Stephen Guilbeault's a bit of a weirdo. Minister of the Environment, MP from Quebec. Poilievre got the better of those exchanges, I think. Stephen knows how to defend himself, though. Up next, an NDP MP, Peter Julian. He's from British Columbia, and he goes up against Francois-Philippe Champagne, who does have some energy to start off the show. Check it out.
Honourable Member from New Westminster, Burnaby.
Anti-scab legislation thanks to the NDP, Mr. Speaker. Now, Loblaws and Walmart have rejected the government's voluntary code of conduct on grocery pricing. That's 40% of the Canadian market. That means that the government's voluntary plan has failed. Now, Conservatives have never raised the issue of food price gouging, but Liberals have a choice thanks to the NDP. Will they stand up against food price gouging that hurts so many Canadian families? Will they adopt the NDP bill to lower food prices now?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we did even more than that, Mr. Speaker. For the first time in Canada's history, we called all the CEOs to come to Ottawa to tell them one thing, Mr. Speaker. We express the frustration of 40 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We expect everyone to do their part, including signing the Grocery Code of Conduct, Mr. Speaker, to help stabilize prices in Canada. But, Mr. Speaker, there's one thing that the member on the other side can do to help Canadians is to vote for C-56 so that we can reform competition and ensure that we have more competition in this country. Why won't they act?
It would seem that Peter Julian is really concerned about groceries. Not as concerned as Francois-Philippe Champagne. He brought a lot of energy right there. Up next, Michael Chong, an Ontario MP, goes up against, again, Stephen Guilbeault. Let's check it out.
Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this government's record on climate change is in. The opening sentence of the Environment Commissioner's report says it all. the federal government is not on track to meet the 2030 target. It's now clear the government's environmental plan is a mishmash of regulations and taxes that aren't working. And it's not just clear to the Commissioner, it was also clear to COP27, where Canada was ranked 58 out of 63 countries for climate change performance. Change starts with acknowledging failure. Will the government?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it quite ironic that this member campaigned for the leadership of his party on a carbon taxing platform, Mr. Speaker, and now all of a sudden it doesn't work. He doesn't believe in it. Well, this morning, the Commissioner to the Environment and Sustainable Development was at the Environment Committee, and this is what he said. He said that not only our pollution pricing is working, but it is responsible for up to 30% of emission reduced in Canada since 2019, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to talk about climate change because they don't want to talk about the fact that they're buddying up with their friends in the big oil companies, and God forbid that we would do anything to affect their profits. We want to fight climate change, and we want to help Canadians in the process, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Speaker, I campaign on a revenue negative carbon tax. This government's environmental plan is revenue positive and a mishmash of taxes and regulations which is dragging the Canadian economy down. Emissions still haven't risen to pre-pandemic highs, and that's because the economy still hasn't recovered. Per capita GDP and productivity are lower this year than in 2017. After 8 years, will the government admit that its environmental plan isn't working, its economic plan isn't working, with productivity and per capita GDP lower today than 6 years ago?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from these conservatives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'm surprised about, not only do they not have a climate plan, they don't even have an economic plan, Mr. Speaker. Their only plan is to cut services, cut investment, cut programs in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I have some piece of good news for you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the OECD ranked Canada third in the world for foreign investment attraction, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. We're creating prosperity. We're creating jobs. We're building Canada of the 21st century.
So Michael Chong and Stephen Guo had a pretty good back and forth there. Up next, Andrew Scheer, an MP from Saskatchewan. He used to also be a House Speaker for the Conservatives back in the day. He's going up against, you know it, Francois-Philippe Champagne. Francois-Philippe Champagne kind of snaps.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
They can huff and they can puff, but their carbon tax house is falling down because it was built on two pillars which have completely collapsed. The first, that it is revenue neutral. Well, the Prime Minister's own budget watchdog has said that Canadians pay far more in the tax than anything they hope to receive. The second is that it would allow the government to hit their own emissions targets. Well, the Liberal-appointed Environment Commissioner confirmed this week that they have no hope of hitting their targets even with the carbon tax. So after 8 years of failure, will the Prime Minister put his ego aside, admit he has a tax plan, not an environmental plan?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, we're getting there. We're 85% of the way to meeting our 2030 targets.
So I've never seen that before. Stephen Guo got shut down. He stopped talking and sat in his seat. Had to look to House Speaker to straighten things out and get the PC party under control. He eventually did. Stephen finished.
Mr. Speaker, we are getting there. We're 85% of meeting our 2030 targets. But do you know what's worse than not even trying? Is not even being willing to admit that climate change exists. Last week, the leader of the opposition was asked in a scrum right over there if he would meet the Paris target. And it was like a deer in front of headlights, Mr. Speaker. He couldn't even answer the question as to whether or not Canada would meet our Paris target. He wouldn't even answer the question. On this side of the House, we are doing everything we can to achieve our 2030 targets, as opposed to the Conservative Party, who want to bring us back to the Stone Age, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
His own government has admitted that they're not going to hit those targets, Mr. Speaker. And they're getting there? Does somebody have a participation trophy we could send across the way? Maybe they would get there faster faster if they stopped saying no to clean energy projects, like when they killed a tidal electricity project in Atlantic Canada that would have created zero emissions power for Canadians, or when they say no to nuclear, when they say no to carbon capture. There were 18 LNG terminals on the books when this Prime Minister took office. 0 have been completed. So instead of canceling clean energy projects, why don't they cancel their carbon tax?
Andrew Scheer is back, this time for the Minister of Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson. I think that Andrew Scheer is probably a really funny person. He has these dimples and evil-looking eyes. It's a conundrum. It's weird, right?
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
His own government has admitted that they're not going to hit those targets, Mr. Speaker. And they're getting there? Does somebody have a participation trophy we could send across the way? Maybe they would get there faster if they stopped saying no to clean energy projects, like when they killed a tidal electricity project in Atlantic Canada that would have created zero emissions power for Canadians, or when they say no to nuclear, when they say no to carbon capture. There were 18 LNG terminals on the books when this Prime Minister took office. 0 have been completed. So instead of canceling clean energy projects, why don't they cancel their carbon tax?
The honourable member for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As is too frequently the case in this House, the member is just factually wrong. At the end of the day, the previous Conservative government got almost nothing built, including 0 LNG facilities, because it actually gutted the environmental assessment process. It paid no heed to environmental impacts. It did not have a climate plan. At the end of the day, we have put in place measures to ensure that we are going to see good projects go ahead going forward, including offshore wind in Atlantic Canada, battery manufacturing plants in Bécancour, the Volkswagen electric vehicle plant, Air Products hydrogen plant, and a whole range of other things. You have to have a climate plan if you want to have an economic plan. You have neither.
Good news. Up next, Melissa Lantsman. She takes pieces off of Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of the Environment and Climate. Also, she takes a piece off of Jonathan Wilkinson, who, as you know, is the Minister of Natural Resources. Melissa's from Ontario.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
After 8 years of this Liberal government, the Prime Minister's own Environment Commissioner confirmed that he will not meet his targets. He missed 88% of it. Worse, they missed targets in 7 out of the 8 years they have been in power, and the only year they hit the targets is when the economy was shut down for COVID. Still, they insist on punishing Canadians with their carbon tax chaos. So why are these Liberals burying their head in the sand and pretending like the carbon tax is working when Canadians know it isn't?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would invite my colleague to actually watch the proceedings from the Environment Committee this morning, where the Commissioner to the Environment and Climate Change said that not only carbon pricing is working, but it's responsible for 30% of the emissions we've seen in Canada since we've took office, Mr. Speaker. Nothing that would have happened under the Conservative Party. They had no plan to fight climate change. They had no plan to develop the economy. They had no plan for renewable energy, for clean electricity, for electrification of transportation. That's why Canada is so far lagging behind other countries. We're playing catch up, Mr. Speaker, but thanks to all of our efforts, we're getting there. No thanks to the Conservative Party.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Speaker, nobody believes them anymore. They lean on a tax that punishes Canadians that won't meet their own targets. They say no to carbon capture and storage. The Environment Minister himself opposes nuclear. They've delayed approvals to 25 years to mine the minerals we need to get cleaner power. They are tax collectors in 58th place out of 63 countries on climate change. Will they save us the sanctimony, stop killing clean energy projects, and cancel their failed and now selectively applied carbon tax?
As I've said before in this House, people may be entitled to their opinions, but they are not entitled to their own facts. The commissioner this morning actually said that it is effective and it is working, and so do all of the academic. I don't know where you get your this person gets her facts, but at the end of the day, the facts are the facts are the facts. The fact is these folks don't have a plan for climate change, but they also don't have a plan for the economy. In fact, right now in committee, in Natural Resources Committee, they are blocking moving forward with Bill C-49, which is about enabling the development of an offshore wind and a hydrogen program in Atlantic Canada, something supported by the Conservative Premier of Nova Scotia and the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It is bizarre, Mr. Speaker.
I'm always going to side with Melissa Lantsman. I think she wins all the arguments all of the time. She beat those guys up practically. She beat them up. Up next, Rick Perkins, an MP from Nova Scotia. I know Rick Perkins. Sometimes he's sharp, sometimes he isn't. Which is it going to be today? We don't know. He's going up against Jonathan Wilkinson.
Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
8 years times 0 targets met is still 0. Yeah. And after 8 years of that 0 government, Canadians know that their environmental record is nothing but hot air and hypocrisy. The Bay of Fundy can supply green tidal energy to all of Nova Scotia and make us a net exporter of green energy. Yeah. The only successful project to harness the power of the Bay of Fundy, delivering endless green energy, was killed by these Liberals when they refused to renew the permit. They killed capital investment in tidal power. Why does this Prime Minister claim to support green energy but veto green tidal projects?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
You know what is the height of hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker? It's a member of Parliament who was elected on a campaign platform that included a price on pollution who now disavows that every day in this House. It's an Atlantic Canadian member of Parliament who is actively opposing the development of a major offshore wind and hydrogen project in Nova Scotia in direct opposition to the Conservative Premier of his province. That, Mr. Speaker, is the height of hypocrisy.
Like I was saying, Perkins sometimes is sharp, sometimes he's dull. Today was in between. I can relate to that. Him and Wilkinson seem to be on the same side of those green energy projects. Don't know why they're arguing. Up next, John Barlo, MP from Foothills, Alberta. Looks just like Clark Kent, but very sharp with his words. He takes on 2 Liberals with 2 different questions. Let's go.
Member from Foothills.
After 7 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister has not hit a single emissions target. In fact, Canada is ranked 58 out of 63 countries when it comes to climate action performance. It's clear this Prime Minister doesn't have, the only green plan this Prime Minister has is diverting greenbacks from his carbon tax to his Liberal friends. That's right. But when our most important allies, Germany and Japan, come to Canada for help, for clean Canadian LNG, he turns his back. Exactly. Why does this Prime Minister support diverting Canadian tax dollars to $1 billion green slush fund instead of unleashing clean Canadian energy the world desperately needs?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, the Conservatives' reckless and risky inaction on climate change has indeed gone global. They don't have a plan for Canada. They won't commit to the Paris targets. And now they're blocking a trade deal with Ukraine that has the most comprehensive and ambitious environment chapter in a free trade agreement by Canada. If Ukraine can fight Russia and prioritize fighting climate change at the same time, so can we, and we are.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, the Minister is clearly misleading Canadians. So the Liberals don't have an environment plan. What they have is a political agenda. The Prime Minister has 2 carbon tax punishing Canadian families, which we know now does not reduce emissions. But when his polls plummet in Atlantic Canada, he can remove the carbon tax from home heating oil, the energy source with the highest emissions. Well, at the same time, the Liberal Environment Minister, under a wave of red tape, kills a tidal energy project which would have provided clean electricity for the East Coast. Yeah. So why is the Prime Minister killing clean Canadian energy while his carbon taxes force Canadians to freeze in the dark?
Great question. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
It is incredibly ironical to hear a Conservative member of Parliament talk about the lack of an environmental plan. I mean, we went through 10 years under Prime Minister Harper where there was no regard for the environment, there was no climate plan. We were seen as the dinosaur in the international community because of the lack of any action. This government has put in place a comprehensive climate plan, a robust environmental plan to protect biodiversity in this country, and an economic plan that acknowledges the reality of climate change, is creating good jobs and economic opportunity in every province and territory in this country. Really? My goodness.
So what do you think of Clark Kent, aka John Barlo? He's pretty cool, right? I used to think he was a geek, but I've built some respect for this guy. Pretty good. Up next, two MPs from Ontario, a Conservative and a Liberal, and they're also on opposite sides of the spectrum. You'll see what I mean. One looks like Baby Spice from Spice Girls, the other looks like Kingpin from Spider-Man.
Honourable member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Liberal insiders, officials and members behave like the law doesn't apply to them. They mislead committee, they threaten co-workers and funnel taxpayer money through ghost contractors and even through their own companies. $54 million on the Arrive scam app is only the tip of the iceberg. Now the RCMP are investigating corruption with this NDP Liberal government. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Canadians have had enough of this blatant misuse of taxpayer monies. Is it finally enough for this Prime Minister?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said time and time again, we expect all contracts to be issued following the law as well as procurement regulations. Mr. Speaker, any actions of misconduct will come with consequences. We look forward to the report and the investigations that are ongoing. But Mr. Speaker, once again, our expectations are that contracts are fulfilled and issued following the law.
Larry Brock on this hand, Jennifer O'Connell over here. Polar opposites, eh? Politics, what a funny game. Up next, Mike Barrett. He's a sharp-tongued politician, and he asks a question that no one wants to answer. There's an awkward moment here, and I'm not trying to show any of the House Speaker, but I just do want to include that the House Speaker, Greg Fergus, is still up to his old tricks. Mike Barrett's pretty good, though.
Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
The Prime Minister's hand-picked chair of his billion-dollar green slush fund says that she followed all conflict of interest rules. But we learned at committee yesterday that she was the one that moved a motion that funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to her company that she then took a $120,000 payday from.
Right.
After 8 years, it sure pays to be an insider with this NDP Liberal government. And it's clear to see that this Prime Minister just isn't worth the cost. Canadians want to know if the NDP are going to support Conservatives in their calls for more hearings on this scandal, and they want to know who else got rich.
I see the minister rising on this question, which was directed to which was directed to another party in this House, but I see the minister rising on the House. The minister. I don't see the minister rising to answer this question, which is directed to the fourth party in this House. The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Not surprising that they won't get up to tell us who got rich. The question is obviously for the minister, and if he's too afraid to tell Canadians which of their insiders are getting paid, we learned yesterday from the hand-picked chair that she got $120,000 after moving a motion to get $200,000 paid directly to her company. Millions of taxpayer dollars are being funneled to ineligible companies through corruption and conflicts of interest at this very minute. This minister's officials said that heads would roll, people would be fired, they lost confidence in the board. They found out it was a political problem, decided they wouldn't fire anyone. The Auditor General is investigating, so should Parliament. We want to know who got rich.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer any and all questions that this member would have, Mr. Speaker. But let me to bring facts to the story, Mr. Speaker. By the way, this organization existed 10 years during the Harper government, Mr. Speaker. Let's bring some facts to the table. And one thing that Canadians should know at home, Mr. Speaker, the moment that allegations were brought to my attention, we launched a third-party investigation, Mr. Speaker. And on the basis of that report, Mr. Speaker, we took immediate action to restore governance at the organization. Mr. Speaker, we will not shy away to take any and all actions needed to make sure that they have proper governance at the institution.
He's always going for the jugular, silver tongue, young, handsome, all of these things. Good to see FPC get up there. Maybe he's building his confidence. Just by the way, Francois-Philippe Champagne's the Minister of Industry, Innovation and Science. Weird combination. Last up on the list, we've got Liz May. She just had a stroke. I didn't know that until I found out. She had a stroke in the summertime. Yeah, she's 69 years old. That's not young to be having a stroke, right? Anyways, so best of luck, Liz May. We like you. You're a good person. I sense that about you. And the question is answered by Stephen Gabot, and that's how the show is going to wrap up. Let's take a peek.
Recognize her for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh. Thank you. I mentioned when I got a chance to speak to the House on another occasion that I wanted to run around and hug everyone. I haven't reached you all yet, but I am very happy to be back. My question to the Honourable Minister of Environment, he may not be so happy to see me back, but it's based on the report from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, whose report says this, clearly, quote, the 2030 emissions reduction plan is insufficient to meet the 2030 emissions reduction target. To which I add, the 2030 emissions reduction target is too weak to meet our global share of responsibility for the Paris Agreement goals of holding to 1.5 and as far below 2 degrees as possible. But the Commissioner did say, there's barely enough time to do more to meet the weak target. Will this government cancel the TMX pipeline, ban fracking, and put in place an excess profits tax on the oil and gas?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague. It is good to see her in this House, and I agree with the findings of the Commissioner. We need to do more. Our plan shows that we're at 34% towards a 40% emission reduction target. Since he has done his study, we have put out a number of new measures to help fight climate change and accelerate the reduction of climate pollution, Mr. Speaker, including zero-emission vehicle mandate, new methane regulations, and by the end of the year, as the Prime Minister announced in New York, we will have a framework to cap the emissions of the oil and gas sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And so brings us to the end of question period.
So that brings us to the end of the show, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you like the new format. I do find it flows really well. It's fun to make it. I'm learning more as we go. It was nice to see Elizabeth May back in the House. I didn't know she had a stroke. What a terrible thing to have happen. Anyhow, we're having fun with Canadian politics. We're doing it here. My name's Ehren, Question Period Canada. Like, subscribe, share, comment, all of that. We'll catch you tomorrow. See you next time. Thanks for watching.